Hi, everybody. This is Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, and you're joining us tonight, myself, Ingham County Clerk Barb Byrum, and State Senator Jeff Irwin, to fact-check in real time the Trump rally. We're here to correct the record. Tell me, Barb, talk a little bit about the work that you do and why you thought it was so important to be here tonight in my campaign manager's son's living room.
So I think it's important to address the lies immediately, because the lie will spread around the world before I even actually see the tweet. And it is imperative that we correct those lies, especially in regards to election, because election administration is extraordinarily complex, especially in the state of Michigan. And that's how we are able to run some of the safest and most secure elections in the country. And it's difficult to understand. And so I thought this would be an opportunity to educate.
And Jeff, tell us, why is it that you thought that it was important for us to be here?
In recent years, we saw the election of Donald Trump, which was a real shock to me because I didn't think that someone could be such a serially wrong person, and it offended me. And so, because we're out here fighting for people every day, and it's really frustrating to be up against a Republican Party that's just moved right and has become so extreme in recent years.
Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State here in Michigan is speaking, Kristina Karamo.
She wanted to be a precinct worker, but her local clerk would not even return her call. But she's running for Secretary of State.
She did participate in the Arizona fraud, where they spent how many months reviewing the ballots that were cast in Maricopa County?
And putting that election equipment at risk in Maricopa County as well. It just shows that she doesn't understand election administration, and she is willing to follow the big lie. But we're seeing the problems with these individuals that are believers of the big lie, then becoming election administrators, whether it's local clerk, county clerk, and they're putting our democracy at risk.
All I have to say is at this point, I'm happy that I didn't have much for lunch. So let's take a listen.
We were called liars by our media, who should have asked us questions and scrutinized what we said, but they tried to demonize us.
And one of the things you're hearing from Karamo here, too, is this line that the media says that we were liars. Well, there's a reason why so many members of the media agree. There's a reason why people like me are saying that the big lie was a lie. No, you have a right to tell all the lies you want, but if you run for office in Michigan, if you run to be the top election official in the state of Michigan, and serious people everywhere are saying that you are pressing lies about the election in 2020, you should expect to be held accountable for that.
There's more to it than that, Jeff. And that's that actually when you disseminate disinformation in a way that would cause a person to be deterred from voting, it's an actual felony. That's the interesting thing, is you have somebody who's running for Secretary of State who clearly doesn't understand that some of her own behavior, they can actually be criminally charged for that. And that is something that happens sometimes in our state and many other states as well.
And the public trust that she is taking away right now, it's going to take years to rebuild.
I think we're seeing Matthew DePerno come to the stage.
My name is Matthew DePerno, and I will be your next Attorney General.
We'll see about that.
He's going to have to get through the people of Michigan, who right now have an excellent Attorney General who is not just doing a wonderful job here tonight on Stop the Squeal, but is doing an excellent job bringing resources back to our state, holding accountable polluters and drug manufacturers who've hurt our people. When you bring billions of dollars back to Michigan to help our people, it's going to be tough to beat that with someone who really came onto the scene only because of his blind loyalty to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, we have an Attorney General who looks out for consumers with her consumer protection, and DePerno, who looks out for himself, whether it's the $400,000 that he's gotten from the Election Integrity Fund or from his old law firm.
I am just going to point out the fact that my department has saved ratepayers in the state of Michigan at this point $1.3 billion in challenging efforts to increase rates by utility companies. And that was something that was rarely done in the last couple of Republican administrations. But we've made it a policy to do it each and every case we make the utility prove to the Michigan Public Service Commission that they need that rate increase.
And Michigan ratepayers appreciate that. One thing they don't appreciate is what the last president did, which was go to the Saudi government and say, we need you to stop this price war that you have with the Russians because the Russians are my friends, and I want you to reduce production. The Saudis then did that, and now we're reaping those high prices.
Interesting to note right now, he's talking about mask mandates and vaccine mandates. And as we know, the state currently doesn't have any vaccine or mask mandates. And in fact, all of those would be either from private businesses who have the authority to do that, or they're ordered by a local school board. We certainly haven't had a vaccine mandate, but we haven't had a mask mandate in quite some time.
And I would point out what Republicans did in the Michigan legislature was they advanced legislation to prohibit private businesses from protecting their customers or their employees, which I think is just the opposite of what they claim.
So right now we're hearing DePerno talk about Antrim County, a lawsuit that he lost, but still continues to talk about his election conspiracy.
And it's a Republican-appointed judge that actually threw his lawsuit out, finding it to be completely without merit.
She did to the elderly in this state.
Even the Michigan Auditor General audited this claim that he's making. It's not accurate.
We had these same claims brought forward in the legislature where the Republicans tried to press this lie that Governor Whitmer was, forcing nursing homes to take COVID-positive patients, and then the nursing homes came in and said that wasn't true. The department came in and said that wasn't true, and yet we hear it time and time again. Why? Because it's useful to them politically, not because it's true.
I've got key endorsements already, like Rashawn Maddock.
Let's talk about that for just a second.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Thank you, Attorney General. I remember the day when party chairs did not get involved in this early on until after the convention.
What I think is so scary about it is that here you have somebody who is the co-chair of the party, who is directing and orchestrating this convention, and she has personally made an endorsement. If we had our chair of our party in 2018, had he endorsed, I never would have trusted that this convention would have been accurate, because I would have known that he already, was all in for my opponent. Have you ever before seen a chair or a co-chair of a party endorse prior to the nomination?
I have not. It is important to note that the Democratic Party has caucus, whereas my understanding, the Republicans will vote on an actual ballot using Dominion technology.
Don't you find it odd that Matthew DePerno and so many others go on and on and on about Dominion voting equipment, and yet that's what they're using at their own convention?
They have used, they being the Republican Party, have used Dominion equipment for their conventions in previous years, but only when their candidate has lost do they care about Dominion systems.
Jeff, you serve on the Senate Oversight Committee, correct?
Yes. Right in the wake of the 2020 election, a lot of my Republican colleagues really wanted to believe that there was some sort of election irregularities. They were very upset at the fact that Trump had lost. And what they decided to do is they decided to have a long series of hearings in the Oversight Committee. And we brought in all, sorts of different folks who were claiming election fraud. At the very beginning of this process, what I said is that this is really dangerous. We have laws that govern how we audit elections afterwards. And for the legislature to come along with this sort of extra legal process after the fact to try to determine if we even wanted to follow the will of the voters or not was extremely scary. What they were doing by trying to bring forward some sort of fraud that wasn't there in preparation for a literal coup d'etat at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th was incredibly dangerous. Nonetheless, we spent many, many hours, and I have to give my colleagues some credit because it did take them about 6 months to finally issue a report. But when they finally did issue a report, the committee found no evidence of widespread or systematic fraud in Michigan's prosecution of the 2020 election. That's what Michigan Republicans said after they looked and looked and looked and wanted to find that fraud, but just couldn't. Why? Because it wasn't there. And the testimony that we got was so unbelievable that it landed on Saturday Night Live. That's when the whole country was pointing and laughing at these outrageous lies. It was unfortunate that instead of having the stories come out about what Democrats are doing to protect seniors or how we're fighting PFAS or what we're doing to hold opioid manufacturers accountable, the story that came out was this comical, embarrassing story. Some of these folks like Giuliani and Carone came in and told such outrageous lies that it became fodder for late night comedy.
Barb, can you tell us what's the status with Ms. Carone? My understanding is that she was running for the State House of Representatives.
She thought she was. She's been disqualified from the ballot. She changed her address. I mean, she's got a lot going on in her life, I can only assume. And she still owes the Secretary of State an annual campaign finance report and $1,000.
Ooh, that's some bad luck for Ms. Carone. Well, as we know, the former president is actually going all around the United States, particularly in swing states like Michigan. He is trying to do whatever he can to get people into office that he thinks will swing the election his way. In 2020, here in Michigan, Joe Biden won in a very successful election where we had 5.5 million people come out to vote, but won by 154,000 votes. Still, we saw an onslaught of litigation. Sidney Powell and her efforts to undermine the election. Attorney General Ken Paxton from Texas do something that was just unprecedented. He actually filed a petition before the United States Supreme Court in an effort to decertify the elections, not just in Michigan, but in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, and in Georgia. So it wasn't just Attorney General Paxton. He was joined by an additional 16 attorneys general who drafted an amicus brief in support. Does this mean the next time, let's say Michigan actually votes for a Republican, will New York or California or Massachusetts then decide, well, I don't like the results of the election in Michigan this time. I'm going to challenge our system of democracy. How would it ever continue if you were permitted to do that? It just absolutely didn't make any sense. Nearly every court in every state where these types of cases were heard, they were tossed out. They were found to be vexatious, without merit, lacking in support of either fact or law, because it was so clear from reading the pleadings that they had no idea how elections worked in Michigan or in any of the other states where they had filed this type of litigation.
To me, there's two ways to look at that. One way to look at it is that look at all these judges around the country that looked at these ridiculous lawsuits and they threw them out. Democratic judges threw them out, Republican judges threw them out, even judges appointed by Trump threw them out because they were so ridiculous. One way to look at that is that the system worked. Another way to look at that is that what if their arguments made some sense? What if instead of having Biden win Michigan by 150,000 votes, he won by 10,700 or some number like that with the hanging chads? Then all of a sudden, I worry about whether the system would have held up.
What would happen if you had an attorney general who was determined to ensure, irrespective of the will of the voters, that Donald Trump became the president of the United States again?
Well, other than chaos and violence, we could throw out the will of the voters. When Paxton was trying to throw out the votes of Michigan voters, he was trying to throw out all of the votes. And the reason why election integrity is important is because it has to serve all of us. That's at the heart of why I get so offended when I see the doublespeak that we have in these kinds of events with banners that say, "Save America," when this was literally the man who encouraged folks to storm the U.S. Capitol. And when I saw folks walking around our Capitol with Confederate flags, I blame Trump for that. And I blame every single one of those people that put their loyalty to one man above their loyalty to the nation.
Gone are the days when the loser will concede. We have legislators who were on the same ballot in 2020 challenge the results of the November 2020 election. Those legislators that signed the letter to decertify our elections, they know the results were accurate. It didn't stop them from taking their oath of office and taking office, but yet they're ready to put their election on the line to help Trump.
You know, the entire state House of Representatives was up in 2020. I know as Democrats, we were really hoping to see Democrats take back the House. Our legislature has been very badly gerrymandered by Republicans for a long time. Not anymore come 2022 this year, because of course we have new districts. However, if there was going to be rigging of votes, why wouldn't somebody have also rigged the state house?
I don't think credibility is what they're working with here.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're seeing is just, fame and notoriety that comes the way of some of these attorneys, right? My concern is that attorneys will think this is how I'm going to make my name in the business. And that's why it was so important that, myself, Governor Whitmer, Secretary of State Benson, we filed a grievance with the Texas Attorney Grievance Commission, and frankly, with all the attorney grievance commissions, because we thought there should be consequences for these actions. You might have a First Amendment right to say whatever the hell you want when you're on whatever RSBN TV, but you don't when you're in a court of law. They violated the oaths. The rule is you have to do your due diligence to ensure that the claims that you're making at least have the color of legitimacy to them.
And it's not just Democrats who are saying this. Even the Senate Republican Oversight Report issued by Republicans included some commentary that it seems like these folks know that they're telling falsehoods, and it looks like they're doing it for financial gain.
Let's take a look now and see what Mike Lindell, MyPillow guy, is having to say.
It is appropriate that Mike Lindell is right by the porta potty line.
Yeah, I'm very selective.
True, because he really is full of it.
Here's how you can all pick your endorsements. You say to them, do you think this election was stolen? If they say no, you go, wrong answer.
Look at that. It's becoming a litmus test within the Republican Party that you place your loyalty to Trump above the loyalty of the voters. It's scary to see how far to the right the Republican Party is moving.
And what's interesting is how quickly Trump will turn on his own supporters.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them ardent Trump supporters prior to the 2020 election, and we've seen Donald Trump really go after them.
Just telling the truth in the Republican Party makes it difficult to continue to be a member of the Republican Party.
Well, now is probably a good time to take a break from our sponsor. Today's event is brought to you by cat diapers. Do you have a cat that has outlived his normal lifespan and your kids got as a kitten, but they've since gone to college and that cat has become incontinent? If so, perhaps cat diapers are for you. And by the way, I should tell each of you that I have not received any kind of financial backing whatsoever from the makers of cat diapers.
Use that promo code RSBN.
I think what we've seen over and over again are people who are just profiting off of the big lie.
And aggressive promotion within the right-wing echo chamber that certain folks have been building in this country over really the last 20 or 30 years. You know, it started with talk radio, and then it grew into Fox News. And now we have this whole industry of misinformation that is extremely profitable and in addition to being extremely dangerous to our nation.
And it's really how we're seeing people become radicalized in a way that we never saw before. I might be a little bit older than both of you, but when I was growing up, we had CBS and NBC and ABC and maybe PBS, and it was all pretty bland, but fairly accurate. You know, we have like whatever the hell this station is. See, they've even turned on Fox News at this point because they don't lie enough, apparently. Not to the extent that the pillow guy is satisfied.
What's next? That allows them to run from accountability.
And what I found interesting is the most accountability that I've seen since this started came from Dominion voting systems by their multi-million dollar lawsuits against individuals who had promoted all these inaccuracies about their product.
And I think that's why we're here, subjecting ourselves to Mike Lindell and all the cast of characters, because we just can't continue to let these lies bounce around in that echo chamber without doing everything we can to bring folks to better information.
In Colorado, Tina Peters, you can look this up on Frank's speech. We have the bombshell evidence. There's only one machine in the United States now where we have where you open up and there it all is. Tina Peters took a copy of, backed up her computer.
She got arrested for that. Election administrators can't do that. That is against the law.
This is what
they pretend that they're in favor of election security, and then they go and take actions that are the worst thing that you could do for election security.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at Cross Township in the state of Michigan. Election administrators cannot turn over their election equipment, and if they do, they best be held accountable.
The law is very clear that there has to be security for your equipment, and you can't just allow random people to tamper with the election equipment, correct?
Yeah.
And they're letting people have access to those, not just, here in Michigan and Cross Township, and then of course in Arizona, we talked about that already. They spent 6 months, $5 million, hired this fly-by-night cyber ninjas firm to come in there and tinker with all the election equipment, and they found out at the end what we all knew at the beginning, which was that Biden won Maricopa County, and the vote count was basically unchanged after millions of dollars.
It was slightly changed, and in fact, Biden actually picked up a few votes.
And then they put all that election technology in the waste because those computers cannot be used again.
How costly is that to the municipality and to the state to replace that equipment at that point?
It would be at least $35,000 per tabulator. Times that by how many polling locations are in your municipality, and then times that by how many are in the state of Michigan. There are over 1,500 election administrators in the state of Michigan, so there's significantly more tabulators in the state of Michigan. It's important to note that it's not necessarily just Trump-aligned clerks. Some of the local clerks could potentially be intimidated to hand it over. And
that's a situation I think that we saw actually in Berry County, Michigan as well, where you had the Trump-allied sheriff in that instance trying to gain access to election equipment. There are clerks that have complained that there was some attempt to bully them or intimidate them into doing that. But I think if there's one thing that we can say about the 2020 election, first of all, we saw it all, and the things that we didn't know about, we've begun to see from the January 6th committee, but it really has left a roadmap, if you will, for if you want to undermine an election, How would you do it next time? The reason why Donald Trump is here in the state of Michigan is so that he can know how to undermine an election next time should he run for office in 2024. Jeff, if you could tell us a little bit about what happened in 2020 in terms of Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey and then House Speaker Lee Chatfield, what efforts, if any, were made to potentially overturn the election in Michigan?
Obviously, I wasn't in the room where it happened, but we do know that those Michigan officials were summoned to the White House and that they did have a meeting. We also know that subsequent to the attempt to overturn the 2020 elections, but the Republicans in the legislature have pressed bill after bill that will make it harder for people to vote, that will make lines longer, that would make it easier to have a board of canvassers that might just say that they refuse to certify the election. They've done everything they can in the legislature to make voting more difficult and to make it so that legal Michigan voters would get turned away at the polls. And we all know where long lines are in Michigan, right? Long lines are in crowded places. Crowded places typically are voting for Democrats.
So we know, of course, that with Governor Gresham Whitmer in power, any efforts at voter suppression that come to the legislature will be vetoed and have been vetoed. But Barb, maybe you could tell us a little bit about a ballot proposal called Secure Michigan.
First, I think it's important to note that the voters passed no reason absentee voting and same-day voting registration. In Michigan, we have photo ID. The Secure Michigan initiative will take photo ID to a whole nother level. This initiative will do nothing to make our elections any more safe or secure. And I understand that there were petitions at every seat in this arena, but I think it'll be important to challenge these petitions if they make it that far.
This is not even going to be something that makes the ballot.
Right.
You know, most Michiganders don't want it to be harder to vote, but Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about just this quirk in Michigan where a ballot proposal can become law without ever actually being voted on by the voters of the state?
One of the really cool things about Michigan is that we do have a lot of opportunities for direct democracy that we baked into our Constitution. I think the opportunity for citizens to agree on something and go around the legislature is necessary. But Article 2, Section 9 of the Michigan Constitution doesn't just allow citizens to gather signatures to put something on the ballot. There's also a clause in there that says that the legislature can adopt that language without a vote of the people and pass that just with a legislative majority. And it doesn't end run around the governor.
You're going to get these ballot proposals shoved in your face all spring and all summer. The circulators are legally allowed to lie to you about the contents of it, and they get paid per signature. And a lot of people, I find, don't even read the small print. And I guess we would ask people, please don't do that.
If you feel compelled to sign a petition, slow down, read everything. And also, if there is someone circulating a Secure Michigan petition, please call the Michigan Democratic Party and report them so that we can help educate people of what these petition pushers are actually trying to get your signature for.
Well, one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about when Matt DePerno was up there, look, I started out by saying the Republicans have gotten so extreme, and this isn't your father's Republican Party anymore. And look, those of us who've been interested in politics for a long time are very accustomed to Democrats usually standing up for reproductive justice and Republicans want to criminalize abortion. But these Republicans today are going even farther. They're going after the right to contraception.
Yeah, and one of the things that has troubled me a little, if all three of the men that are running to be Attorney General have indicated that Griswold v. Connecticut, a 1965 case that banned the criminalization of birth control, if they believe it's the state's right, that means they believe that the legislature should have an opportunity to vote on whether or not it is legal or illegal for you and your spouse to use contraception. If they think that is illegal, what about some of these other fundamental issues that rely on the right to privacy? That could be things like the same-sex marriage case, so Bergefeld v. Hodges, the case called Lawrence v. Texas, which outlawed the sodomy laws. And as you guys know, the sodomy laws are still on the books today. It's a 15-year offense, and it prescribes a penalty that is the same as rape. I went so far as to say, what about Loving v. Virginia, which of course allowed legal interracial marriage? And what about Brown v. Board of Education. Of course, the seminal 1954 Supreme Court case that struck down the notion of separate but equal. And so I challenged them to indicate what were their feelings on all these seminal cases that sort of are the same body of jurisprudence as the Griswold v. Connecticut case, silence. So let me speak to the camera here today. If you are running to be the top lawyer in the state of Michigan, could you at least let us know what you think about these important decisions? Because it's going to color the way that you view this office.
And we hear these Republicans wax philosophic about freedom all the time when it suits them. But when it comes to our freedom to have our own private affairs, especially in our own sexuality, that's, I guess, where it stops for them. These are examples where the Supreme Court stepped in for good reason, and they're twisting it to play to some of the ugliest elements within their base. I don't think it's appropriate. I think it's un-American.
These are individuals that think it should be unconstitutional to force a person to wear a mask during the course of a global pandemic, but will tell you at the same time they think it's fine for a legislature to outlaw the use of a condom. And it's been interesting for me because one of the things that I talked about the most is consumer protection. But it's something that traditionally has not really been a partisan issue, right? But today, these Republicans that are running for this office, they don't talk about consumer protection. They talk about all kinds of issues that really don't seem pertinent to the office of Michigan Attorney General. And I would say the same thing with the Secretary of State candidate. What is critical race theory, or what is whether or not transgender girls have an opportunity to participate in their high school athletics? What does that have to do with being either a Secretary of State or an Attorney General?
I can't tell you how many times on the floor of the Senate where I stand up and I say, how are we talking about this rather than services to our seniors, or rebuilding our mental health system, or fixing our roads and bridges, or protecting our water from PFAS? There are so many issues that matter to the people of Michigan. And when we see rallies like this, I think there's a connection to why the legislature has been so irresponsibly distracted. The Republican Party has seen it to be in their advantage to play towards fringe culture war issues, because they know that when you ask the average Michigan person, who is it that cares about your health care? Who is it that cares about an economy that works for working people? Who is it that cares about making college affordable to smart, hardworking kids that don't come from wealthy families? So that's why the Republicans are constantly trying to distract us into something that evokes some sort of emotional response. And they're successful at it for a couple reasons. One reason is because the real issues are hard.
I think it's important also to really discuss Michigan absentee voting. There are so many claims that the Secretary of State mailed out ballots. And that claim is very similar to the claim that Little Caesars delivered a free pizza to my house by merely mailing a coupon. Because what Secretary of State Benson did was mail out absentee ballot applications. The voter then fills out that application for an absentee ballot, signs it. The local clerk will receive that application, compare the signature on the application to the signature on the qualified voter file. If everything matched up, the local clerk, city or township clerk, would then mail the ballot to the voter. The voter would vote the ballot, sign the back envelope. That ballot would come back to the local clerk. The local clerk, or his or her designee, deputy clerk, election administrator, would compare the signatures again and secure it until election day. The Secretary of State typically touches one ballot. It's her own. I, as county clerk, touch one ballot. It's my own.
What was so interesting to me is, of course, the complaint that the Secretary of State sent out absentee ballot applications, when I know that the Republican Party does that.
Oh, absolutely. The state Republican Party, the Michigan Democratic Party, candidates do it. You send out applications for absentee ballots because you want to encourage people to vote by absentee ballot. I would much rather the Secretary of State or my local election official, my county clerk, to send out these applications than a state party, Democrat or Republican, or a candidate, because it is the election administrators that are going to do it right and make sure it's done correctly the first time. It's important also to note that absentee ballots are not tabulated until polls open on election day. It takes a long time to tabulate ballots, especially if you're a large municipality. So when you hear the claims about the TFC Center, that they were still bringing in truckloads of ballots, ballots have to be in the possession of the local clerk by the time polls close on election day. So voters probably deposited their ballot in a drop box. Those ballots had to go to the local clerk to be inventoried in, signatures matched, and then taken to the absentee counting board to be tabulated.
And I wonder, Barb, Ingham County, where you're the county clerk, that's a traditionally Democratic county, but there are portions of Ingham County that are red. So those are your constituents too.
Yep. So I'm from the rural conservative portion of my county. And so I am often talking to Republicans who indicate to me that they know our elections are safe and secure. They know that they were accurate because they work elections, or their spouse works elections, or they trust their election administrators. Most election administrators in the state of Michigan are Republicans. These Republican clerks are finding that they are having to stand up and tell their grassroots supporters that no, the election is accurate. And now they're getting pushback and will likely be primaried for standing up for elections and doing their job and serving the public.
Well, with all the backlash from the 2020 election, are those people even going to stay in office at this point?
I know of quite a few county clerks as well as local clerks who have retired. Many have received threats. These are our neighbors. We see them in the milk aisle at the grocery store. We buy Girl Scout cookies from their children. Election administrators are probably not going to stick around, and they're going to be replaced by individuals who think the election was rigged and really put our elections and our democracy at risk. And the frustrating part about all of these election lies and conspiracy theories is that they prey on individuals not understanding election administration. I mean, legislators too.
Yeah, I've seen that even happening in counties where we know that Trump received the majority of the votes.
Right.
Yeah, Antrim's a great example, right?
Yeah, wonderful example.
I remember watching the returns on election night, and Antrim County was lit up blue. And I remember the first thing sitting there with my wife thinking, okay, that's
wrong.
Clearly wrong,
Yeah.
right? Turns out it was actually the clerk's office that had transposed those numbers. Early the next morning, the clerk in Antrim County realized the mistake was made and owned up to it, despite what was a rather mundane mistake, and which was quickly corrected, and for which the details of how it happened were revealed immediately. Still, that Antrim County mistake was spun up into a national controversy.
On election night, what you're looking at, Senator, is the unofficial election results. But those unofficial election results are then canvassed by the Board of Canvassers. They eventually will certify that election. Then the state will canvass and certify the election. And then under statute, we're required to do random audits. So it's when the county clerk comes in, and the audit is not just a procedural audit, also a hand count. Then there is the risk limiting audit. It was done as a public audit in my county. And then I had the unique opportunity with the Office of Auditor General, who decided to audit the audit.
The Auditor General is selected by the legislature. So this is somebody who the Republicans picked.
Yeah, and so his delegates came in and audited my audit. So we went through all over again, and I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn that the results did not change. We have so many checks before the election, which I haven't even discussed, but then we have checks after the election. And honestly, if anyone questioned the results of the election, they should have filed a recount. They didn't file for a recount.
They didn't file for a recount because they wanted to keep pressing for this vague forensic audit thing that they could keep pushing for and never get, and therefore
make
keep
money
the ball
off of.
in the air and use as a grift.
As a result of that, we had Ryan Kelly recently said, unplug the tabulators.
Okay.
We heard him on video saying, unplug the tabulators.
Ryan Kelly being a candidate, a Republican candidate for governor.
And Mike Detmer, who said, show up armed.
And he's a candidate for state senate. Well, and I will say this, when there are actual issues of voter fraud, I mean, it's not as though it never occurs, but because of all these layers of protection, that almost always is brought to the attention of the Bureau of Elections. You hand it over to law enforcement, and we do prosecute when that happens. We have a public integrity division in my office. They have served through both Democratic and Republican administrations, and it's their job to review those cases, and then we charge those cases. We actually have cases right now against a few different clerks. The Southfield City Clerk, who committed some election fraud in the 2018 election. We have a Flint Township clerk who was involved in some antics involving the primary in 2020. So when we do see it, and again, it's rare and it usually affects very few votes, but when we see it, those people are held accountable. But I always liken it to the bank robbery cases that I've seen. Yeah, sometimes banks get robbed, but almost inevitably every time, because of all the security measures, those people get caught.
And it's the legislature's role to set those rules and to make sure that we keep our election security laws up to date. But we need to set those laws and rules before the election. But what we cannot have is a system where one party can try to change the rules after the election.
Right. Well, and I think that is one of the reasons why you have Donald Trump, again, not just supporting Secretary of State and Attorney General candidates, but also state legislators. It's his belief that there would be some way for the state legislators to try to overturn or decertify the results of an election, or even to skew it in the first place. You know, say what you will about Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey or former Speaker of the House, Lee Chatfield, but it was clear to me that when they were summoned to the Oval Office, that both the Speaker and the Majority Leader seemingly wanted nothing to do with that plan. But that's why it seems so important to Trump, and we know that he's got a favorite who he wants to be Speaker of the State House. And ironically, that individual is the husband of the co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party, a man by the name of Matt Maddox.
And this is one of the individuals who tried to bring a false set of electors into the Capitol.
What is everyone expecting to hear from the former president?
When he was in Michigan last, and he said, if I lose Michigan, I'm not coming back to Michigan, right? Another one of his lies, because here he is coming back to Michigan. I think that what we're going to see is an attempt at a rousing, play to the base, gin up every little element of culture war and conservative disgust that he can.
He's really focused on relitigating the 2020 election. He just cannot possibly conceive of the fact that he lost Michigan. And what's so strange to me is that he won by the skin of his teeth in 2016. So it shouldn't be surprising to him if he didn't win in 2020. But I will say this about 2016. I mean, we had incredibly low turnout in 2016. Frankly, a lot of Democrats didn't vote, and a lot of Democrats who did vote did not fill out the top of the ticket.
During the 2016 presidential, some Democrats went with Jill Stein, and so that split some of the Democratic vote. It's interesting comparing 2016. I thought 2016 would never end because we had the recount and lawsuits and everything else, and then we had November 2020. And I don't have sage. I do have a gay guy candle company candle to light because it's the ghost of the November 2020 election that just keeps on coming. So,
again, this is not product placement, but the gay candle guy makes a lot of good candles.
They do make a lot of good candles. They're from your Senate district, I believe. And I'm a huge proponent for these candles because, let me just show you. Election officials are the backbone of our democracy. And it smells good. It's not sage, but it smells good.
I see you've also got Better Made chips and Sanders.
snacks.
What else you got?
What other
You've
kind
got a
of
bunch of good
Michigan
Michigan
products do you
stuff
have
there.
there?
I've been thinking maybe we need to have a state pop. We've got a state bird. We've got a state
You know I got you there, my friend.
burners. How about
So
fingers?
There you go.
You're going to have the red pop,
Oh, fantastic.
moon mist.
Oh,
my favorite
my
is the
God.
cream soda.
Oh, I
But-
have the cream soda too.
Well, we
Those are
can
great.
share.
Well, again, just so it's clear to everyone, we get no sort of financial
No, I
support
bought all of this.
whatsoever from any of the makers of these products. We just happen to really love our Michigan products here in Michigan.
Yeah.
So for those of you out there who aren't from Michigan, Michigan has a lot of great stuff. Not just cars, but also amazing beaches. Come visit
That's
the
right.
Great Lakes. They are the most amazing lakes in
are.
the entire
And
world. And Democrats are here in Michigan trying to protect that natural beauty, trying to make sure it's here for generations to come, so that not just can you come and visit our great beaches and our Great Lakes, or come to see some of our natural rivers with some of the best fishing in the world, but maybe your grandchildren and their children can come here too. All the product placement is just because those of us from Michigan, I know that when I go to Kroger, which is a UFCW shop, it's a union shop, I like to go to Kroger. I like to buy my UAW Ford that I drove here. And so Michigan does a lot of great stuff. And so we're real proud of it.
The Michigan flag, though, protecting Michigan in that flag, there is a moose and an L, correct?
Yes.
Now, has there been any debate or discussion in any of the committees that you sit on possibly changing those to cats?
Oh, yes.
No, there have not. But I really appreciate the aggressive cat advocacy that you bring to the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Well, I will say that I am having a competition with the governor over cutest pet. Now, to be fair, the governor doesn't know about our competition. Are we still waiting for President
Yes, I
Trump?
think
You know
here?
what's amazing?
Okay.
To know
How-
what's
All right.
surprised. They
Right?
started getting in line at 11 o'clock this
We
morning.
did. And my understanding is there was some sort of a fire code issues.
And these poor people that are currently cheering, if it's 30 degrees and raining there right now, and they're parked in fields, I'm worried that they're going to be stuck in the mud for days.
You see a lot of these MAGA hats out here in the audience. And I mentioned earlier that Michigan is a state that believes in labor unions and knows that labor unions build help the middle class. And I just think it's so ridiculous that he has all of his materials made in China, yet he rails against it. It's just another one of these examples of complete cognitive dissonance. And to me, that's very discrediting.
This is, I think, something that differentiates us as parties, Republicans versus Democrats. We are so quick to eat our own, generally speaking. When we have a Democrat and we feel like there were 100 things that they promised and they only do 99 of those things, we are furious at them. Why do you think it is that so many people have taken to Donald Trump in this way, where they will talk about supporting him through thick and thin?
It's absolutely a cult. I mean, I was a supporter of Barack Obama. I had a sweater that had his name on it, but I stopped wearing it after the election. You wear it because you're a walking billboard, but when the election is over, then you stop. You don't keep flags in front of your home with the president's name on it, and you certainly don't have them higher than the American flag. I hold my elected officials accountable, whether I voted for them or not.
Democrats are trying to solve difficult issues. Obama ran on hope and change. Whereas Republicans, their message is that government doesn't work, government is corrupt, government doesn't do anything for you. And then when they get in office and deliver on every one of those items, it just confirms their own message and what people expect. And whereas Democrats, we're out there trying to get things done for our seniors, for our kids, for our future, and all they have to do to be successful is block us and then point and blame.
There he is.
I'm sure the crowd was eager for him to come out a half hour early when his opening speakers lasted maybe 2-3 minutes apiece. Those were suspiciously short speeches.
Yeah, right?
And we just came in. We have thousands and thousands of people outside.
Rousing way to start, talking about crowd size.
Exactly.
All the important issues.
The stakes of this year's midterm elections could not be higher.
Well, that part is true.
Michigan is going to be an absolute epicenter of the election this year, and anybody who cares about the future of the United States of America should absolutely be focused on what's happening in Michigan.
And violent carjackings are ravaging Detroit, Chicago, Minneapolis, and Milwaukee at a rate never before seen.
Suddenly
Biden
he's
is
factually
far
inaccurate.
It's also using statistics that are based on the pandemic. You know, a lot of things slowed down during the pandemic. And then they look at this big jump. Of course, that works both ways. Joe Biden has had the largest job growth in the history of the United States under any president. That's partially because we're coming out of one of the biggest troughs.
Had the election been different.
Had the election been different, there it is. That's because Biden won.
And you people delivered. Unfortunately, the vote counters.
Oh, he just
didn't
remembered
deliver.
that now.
Yeah.
He's saying the vote counters didn't deliver.
That's not how counting works,
And now
unless you're
Biden's
cheating.
a far cry from the Trump administration where we were energy independent.
He's not going to talk about the thousands and thousands of leases that are unused by oil companies because of the low demand during the pandemic. And he's not going to talk about how he went to the Saudis and encouraged them to reduce their production to help his friend Vladimir Putin because Russia was getting crushed by low oil prices. He's not going to talk about how he withheld Javelin missiles from Ukraine in order to try to leverage a political favor from the president of Ukraine. He's also not going to talk about when they finally did deliver those Javelin missiles to Ukraine, that they required that they keep them in the west side of Ukraine and not use them against the Russians. He's not going to tell the people the truth about what he really did in foreign policy. He's going to continue to lie.
If you want a country that is strong, sovereign, solvent, safe, and secure, you must vote for America.
Actually, the
First
debt increased exponentially under Donald Trump, and it's only now that Joe Biden is able to dig our way out.
Absolutely. Obama left him with a booming economy, and instead of trying to reduce the deficit and do what you're supposed to do during the good times so that you've got a tool to fight against downturns, instead he just kept the pedal to the metal, kept spending like a drunken sailor, and now he wants to complain about deficits.
It's funny, he's talking about issues at the border, but he's talking about the southern border. What he doesn't seem to appreciate is that we actually are a border state, but for Canada. I didn't hear Donald Trump complaining when you had Canadian truckers who for days on end blocked one of the biggest international border crossings, the Ambassador Bridge. The state of Michigan lost millions and millions of dollars as a result of that. This incredible interference with not just interstate commerce, but of course international commerce.
Yeah, he didn't only not talk about it and not oppose it, but he supported it and encouraged it. And it also sidesteps the fact that America is a nation of immigrants. You benefit from from that. And there are farmers all over Michigan, there are employers all over Michigan, and there are employers all over our country right now who wish that we had smart, sensible immigration policies that allowed people to come in and work hard and become part of our economy.
I was right about everything, and that's true.
I was right about everything.
Wow.
Biden and the radical Democrats are spending billions and billions of dollars trying to secure the borders of distant foreign countries, many of which you've never even heard of.
He thinks very lowly of his own supporters, I think.
Not just that. It sounds like he was targeting Ukraine with that.
Oh, perhaps.
We're
Yeah,
being
what is he
invaded
talking
by
about?
millions and millions of people. Many of them are criminals who should not be allowed into our country.
Feels like this is a theme he can't really let go of.
Well, it's because, once again, it plays into those base fears. There are a lot of people in this country who see the nation changing and evolving as it does, and they feel what they're accustomed to slipping away. And it's really an ugly tactic because it's based on a lot of fears that play into racism.
Instead of a sense of unity, it's a sense of divisiveness. It's xenophobia, racism, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia. It's alarming that so many people can be drawn to that.
Does anybody have a whole group of people that got resettled next to your beautiful little house?
He's in Macomb County. What is he talking about?
If I heard it correctly, he's actually talking about refugee resettlement. And Michigan has a long, proud history of welcoming refugees.
I was actually at a State of the County event that Mark Hackle had, the county executive of Macomb, and he talked about the great contributions of immigrants who had come to Macomb County and really enriched it, and really how their businesses were thriving.
And you know where one of the largest enclaves of Ukrainian Americans is? In Macomb
That's
County.
right.
And in my community, we have a ton of recent Syrian refugees, which is a credit to Michigan's future. They're bringing skills, and it's the right thing to do.
AOC plus 3. You know who AOC plus 3 is?
I can guess.
Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, that's another beauty. And just like they've destroyed Israel,
Right,
Israel
Israel.
has taken a hit like no other country's taken.
Really? Not like
It used to be
Ukraine?
hands off Israel.
It's always just sort of a wild caricature of what you wish the other side stood for, is kind of how he comes out with it.
Republicans dramatically increase funding for ICE and Border Patrol and law enforcement.
One of the things that's outrageous to me is we often hear these Republicans talk about how they want to increase funding for law enforcement. But what we see in the legislature is the Republicans defunding the police.
And
yet,
it's the Democrats that make sure law enforcement have bulletproof vests, proper weapons.
And oddly enough, one of the guys who's running for Attorney General, who ran against me last time, talks about how supportive he is of the police, but yet wasn't he the very person that tried to remove their retirement benefits or their medical benefits during retirement?
yeah, absolutely. And then also just attacking their collective bargaining rights, trying to take away their right to have a voice in their workplace.
Ukraine would never have happened if I was in the White House.
I wonder if he believes that. But then again, I wonder if he believes anything
Very
he
well.
says.
In fact, I stand as the only president of the 21st century on whose watch Russia and Putin did not invade another country.
It's interesting that he's trying to take credit for something that didn't happen,
Yeah.
as though he had agency in that.
So couldn't all those other presidents claim that nothing also happened during that time period?
Yeah, but they would probably be too embarrassed to
How's
make
that?
that claim,
That's true.
because they have real accomplishments.
Me
How
too.
stupid is this country? How stupid are we?
How stupid is
He
this
just
country?
called our
The
country
deal is a
stupid.
disaster.
We respect the people we work
Also,
with.
during
We listen to
my 4
them.
years,
We try to make a connection with them that is real, rather than setting ourselves apart from them and denigrating them and saying that I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and you'd still vote for me. He goes on, insulting Americans and insulting his own voters. You know, they still keep giving money to DePerno for Stop Steal, or buying whatever collectible coins are advertised on whatever the heck RSBN is.
you also had a president who always put our country first.
Put himself first.
Absolutely.
With America in the back seat.
Historians will record this period of American history as a catastrophic low point and a stain upon our once great reputation.
Well, he did stain our great reputation,
That part is
and
factual.
Trump absolutely set America back worldwide. And that's one of the things that was most sad about his election.
Seeing world leaders openly mock him. There were some international policy conferences where he sent Ivanka, his daughter, as some sort of an expert.
Now, I don't know anything about the automobile business except that I saved it for your stuff.
Oh, no.
The time?
Say, yep.
Yeah.
All right. Ready?
flag.
Trump did not save the auto industry.
No, absolutely not.
Kind of reminds me of his claim that he was named like Person of the Year in
Right, right,
Michigan,
right.
or
Yeah,
like
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
it
yeah.
was. It
Fake.
doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
He'll claim whatever he wants to claim. Sort of like he was in favor of the Iraq War. Running for president, well, now I'm against it. First he was pro-choice, and then when he decided he wanted to run as a Republican, well, now I'm as pro-life as you can be.
His stated purpose for coming to Michigan was to stump for these candidates.
30 minutes in, I haven't heard any of the candidates' names or anything they stand for. I've just heard about how great he thinks he is.
In fairness to him, though, we heard from both of those candidates, and they also didn't seem to say anything about what they were going to do or what they stood for or what their experience was for the job. Maybe there's just nothing to say about any of that because they're such manifestly unqualified candidates.
Record high gas prices. These numbers at $150 a barrel. It's going much higher. California now is over $8 a gallon for gasoline. In
I bet
addition,
Trump
your
didn't care about
crazy
California.
Democrat governor
I also don't
and
think
your
that's true.
attorney general who's vicious
Yeah.
and doesn't have a clue, but she is indeed vicious what she's trying to do to people.
Is this me? Am I the
Yeah.
vicious one?
Yeah.
Who knows what the hell Line 5 is?
I would say we know much better than you do.
They're trying to shut down Line 5 pipeline that provides 55% of all propane gas
False.
in the state of Michigan. They want
Not
to
true.
close it.
Now's a good time to remind the audience that 95% of everything that goes through Line 5 actually services Canadian citizens and doesn't go to Michigan at all. And I believe this is the year that Line 5 turns 70.
Yeah, usually when you turn 70, you start leaking and have to be retired. But I think what his comments show is that he's not putting America first. He's putting oil companies first. He's going to stump for a Canadian oil company before he pushes for real solutions that could bring our residents cheaper energy. And you know what is the cheapest, most independent energy that we could be investing in right now? These same renewable sources that he's denigrating. I remarked earlier on how when oil prices were super low during the pandemic, Trump went on a world tour to try to encourage all of the oil companies around the world to slow production. You'd think if prices were super low for Americans and consumers, that would be a good thing, but it wasn't good for the oil companies.
It's almost like you
If
must
that.
have an investment.
It's
Almost.
almost like he's personally invested.
First president, I think, in the history of the United States not to divest of his personal holdings.
The Trump family engaged in a lot of different corruptions of this sort, whether it was Trump Hotel, whether it was, as you said, employing his family members in various positions of
What
prominence.
about all the violations of the Hatch Act? He actually had the Republican National Convention at the White House. He literally treated government property as though it was his own family's property.
Did he give up his salary this month? The answer is yes. This went on for 4 years.
No,
He wants to talk
giving
about
up
that because it's a
his-
gimmick.
Yeah, this is the Donald Trump show, which is exactly what we expected to see. Yeah.
How much money did it cost alone to restore the Capitol after the January 6th attack?
It's a big number financially, but you also think about the damage that was done to the Capitol Police Force, the damage that was done to our very soul as a nation to see Trump supporters traipsing around in that building with Confederate flags. You know, we saw that here in our Michigan Capitol as well. I'm certainly never going to forget those images.
Here, somebody who claims to be pro-police. And if you remember, what they used actually as an assault weapon were Blue Lives Matter flags that they then used to beat police officers to death.
Yeah.
And you remember that first officer that died. Trump refused to even acknowledge his death or to lower the flags or anything of that nature.
We had more jobs than we've ever had in our
Massive
country in history.
job increases under Joe Biden.
When you're coming from President Trump, who always talked about how great he was, and then we move to Joe Biden as our president, who doesn't talk about how great he
He's so
is.
self-effacing and humble.
Not only has Biden seen the biggest gains in recent months, but one of the other things we're seeing in the economy is we're seeing wages go up and we're seeing unemployment at some of the lowest levels ever. Unemployment is extremely low and people's wages are going up for one of the first times since maybe the 70s, which is a great thing.
Your corrupt state officials sent out 7.7 million unsolicited mail-in ballot applications. To everyone on
The people who were, quote, dead were alive when they voted and then died before the votes could be counted.
That is why the Michigan Association of County Clerks has asked the legislature to allow county clerks to mark voters deceased, not just the local clerks, because county clerks get the death records and we're often the first to know. And that helps clean up the rolls, but the Republicans are not acting on legislation that election officials want. They're only acting on election legislation that they want.
They didn't do anything. They didn't make any changes. Zuckerberg.
And we know that a court recently found that because any of the 501c3 money that went for election purposes was equally
to those that
irrespective.
applied.
That's right.
And the money was used to hire more election workers. It was hired to purchase more tabulators because if you will recall, we were in the middle of a pandemic and absentee ballots were coming in. And so election officials needed those resources because the state of Michigan refuses to adequately invest in election administration.
And I think the reason why they do that is because where do we see long lines? Where do we see crowded precincts? And they know that long lines are going to chase some voters away. There are some communities in our state where folks can vote really easily. Walk right in, walk right out. And then there are other areas where people have to wait 2, 3, 5 hours to vote. That's not equal access to the vote. And that's one of the problems that we should be trying to solve in Lansing.
It's the Democratic Party. There is an IC at the end. You don't get to rename our party. Oh, rhinos. There we go.
In name only.
That's just any Republican that has any kind of disagreement with Donald Trump. You have to swear a blood oath and loyalty to Donald Trump, or you can't be a member of the Republican Party.
The people that are looking for the truth and they're looking for the corruption, which has largely been found.
I would point everyone to the Senate Oversight Committee, chaired by Senator McBroom from the Upper Peninsula. Senator Irwin served on that committee. Read it for yourself. He is a Republican chair, and as a result of this report, he has been ostracized by former President Trump, but the Republicans themselves have said the election results are accurate. 50 minutes in, and he's starting to talk about the candidates he's there to stump for.
Kristina, Karamo. Come up, Kristina.
Not qualified to be a precinct worker as determined by her local clerk. She thinks she is qualified to be the Secretary of State.
Kristina spent days at the TCF Center in Detroit and was appalled by the cheating and the corruption that she witnessed.
Not true. There was not corruption. The TFC Center was an absentee counting board for the city of Detroit. Many news outlets have debunked these claims time and time again.
In fact, there were many news outlets that were there and attested to the fact that the only issues that they had were after the then chair of the Republican Party in Michigan, Laura Cox, called all those people down there to cause a ruckus.
One of those people that caused a ruckus is Michonne Maddox. And there's a picture of her holding her cell phone out to record the absentee counting process, which is prohibited.
You know, they tried to create chaos. They tried to create a scene.
And they tried to stop the count.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, Laura Cox would not report any specific instances of voter fraud to the county prosecutor because they didn't have any.
They were just trying to create the illusion that there was chaos down there by creating the chaos themselves and then pointing to the chaos and saying, well, clearly something was going wrong.
And if there were legitimate concerns about a jurisdiction and their administration of election, perhaps they should talk to that clerk.
And if you want to look at the receipts, you need to call for a recount. And they didn't want to call for a recount because they knew it was going to cement their failure.
We actually had a person in our presidency who loved our country and who didn't do it to advance himself, but to actually fight
He
back.
did do it to advance himself.
All he did was advance himself.
Interesting, as according to the state of Michigan, I didn't vote in the 2020 election.
I'd like to vote. I'm sorry, ma'am, but you voted before this
So,
happened.
in Michigan, if someone votes by absentee ballot and mails their ballot back, sometimes some of our more seasoned voters will forget that they voted by absentee ballot. So if they then show up at the polls, they will be denied a ballot because they had already voted. That is part of the check system in our elections.
Well, it was weird because she was saying that her vote wasn't recorded. You couldn't have your vote not recorded and then also have someone vote for you. The stories are just really incongruent and they're just kind of jumbled up for effect.
Michigan's next Attorney General, a great and powerful lawyer.
Well, he does
Who
lose,
is
though,
voting
like
his
a lot.
Of course, sir, he ended up having to pay $20,000 to the Detroit News. He got fired from his law firm
For padding
bills. Ethical is not how I would describe him.
Matt led the explosive investigation to what happened in Antrim County. Votes were switched by mistake. You know, we caught
They were
them, right?
corrected in the canvas. Humans do make mistakes. Election administration is done by humans. But that is why there's a canvas and a certification and then audits after that.
In fact, DePerno came along after it was corrected and filed suits and had events to try to basically make money off of
Basically, he did.
Republicans nationally. Yeah, it drew in $400,000 from Republicans nationally, claiming to be unearthing some sort of election fraud in Antrim that he had to know wasn't there, especially after weeks and weeks of looking and finding nothing and coming up with bumpkus.
But before he can defeat soft on crime, and she's soft on crime. She's only strong on Republicans.
Actually have prosecuted more Democrats than Republicans, if you look at my record. But in addition to that, I markedly increased the number of types of units we had in our criminal division.
And one of the first things I saw our Attorney General do actually was take a number of political appointees that Bill Schuette had employed in the office and eliminate those positions and instead put them into staff attorneys and other resources that actually propel the mission of the agency. I see the Attorney General fighting against opioid manufacturers and PFAS manufacturers rather than engaging in the kinds of lies that Matt DePerno does.
Remember in January 2017, he stood on those steps in Washington, D.C. President Trump said to every one of us, "Today, I give the country back to the people."
And then he encouraged his followers to go to those same steps.
Break into the Capitol, threaten not just lawmakers, but try to stop the process of certifying the presidential election.
Possibly execute his own vice president. Right.
No longer will we allow the elites in this country to control us.
Well, I certainly hope not. You know, that's what Democrats have been all about from the very beginning. That's why I'm a Democrat, because Democrats are about trying to balance the scales for people who don't have power in this system, whereas Republicans are always there for the wealthy, whether it's oil companies or telecom companies. And Democrats are always fighting for working people, fighting for folks who have less, trying to make sure that there's a certain basic level of dignity for all Americans.
We will restore this state back to what it once was, a constitutional republic.
There it is. They really hate the use of the word democracy. Do you notice that?
They certainly do.
They don't want to call us a democracy.
That's why Trump didn't support democratic principles worldwide when he was president, and that's why they wouldn't respect the results of the election when the voters kicked him out of office. They think they know better than the people. Year after year, we see Republicans pushing for the interests of the wealthy and the powerful, and yet they're able to go out there and say, no, that's not what we're doing. And there are people who believe it.
Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, and I dare say I hope the 47th.
He is there to ensure that our electoral votes go to Donald Trump, irrespective of what the will of the people determines. That's why he's supporting Kristina Karamo for Secretary of State and why he's supporting Matthew DePerno for Attorney General, just so that he can be the 47th president of the United States.
Matt, you're going to win. And you and Kristina have just taken it by storm. Everyone loves you both. And you're going to get to the
I wouldn't say everyone.
It actually seems like the Republican Party in Michigan is split in two, and there are some that are pushing for the Trump loyalists, and there are others who are saying, oh no, our party is moving so far to the right into Pizzagate, QAnon territory that we're not going to be able to win. I hope that that's correct, that the Michigan voters look at these extreme right-wing candidates and say, we're not going to elect QAnon supporters to be the top lawyer and the top election official.
Again, Matthew DePerno, one of his number one campaign promises is to imprison myself, the Secretary of State, and the governor. And that is an odd promise to make. This is an office that has criminal jurisdiction over all 83 counties in the state and is the top law enforcement official.
Be sure to ask every candidate running if they will support the Trump ticket. And if they won't give you that assurance, don't give them your vote. They're all endorsed by me, every one of them. You're all leading.
He has no idea who they are. They have to go through the Maddox family in order to get an endorsement.
And this just shows you it's really not about being a conservative anymore. It's really about loyalty to Trump. So some of the candidates that he's supporting in primaries against other Republicans are running against like rock-ribbed conservative Republicans, right? You mentioned Sarah McBroom earlier from the Western UP, but also not willing to author a report that said there was fraud. Instead, helped author a report that said there was no fraud. That's the litmus test that Trump cares about. It's not about your values. It's not about your conservatism. It's about, do you have blind, unflinching loyalty to me? And it's become this cult of personality around one man.
Is there anything better than a Trump rally? Seriously.
Yes. There are many things that are better than a Trump rally.
I had a colonoscopy, and it was better than this Trump
Wow,
rally.
you went there.
I do wish success on some of those Republicans who are trying to save their party from the Trump cult of personality, because there are some Republicans out there who are trying to do their best to bring their party back from the brink.
And what I find so fascinating is those Republicans that are trying to save their party are the Republicans back in my time in the legislature that were so conservative that I would stay away from, and now they're reasonable.
Many of the Republicans in Congress had strong words on the day of January 6th when they saw Trump send a crowd down to the Capitol with batons and beating police officers and parading around with Confederate flags. They were angry. You know, they should rightly be angry that Trump defiled the Capitol in that way. But then the next day, 180 degrees.
Yep.
That was a long time ago. Man of the Year in Michigan.
No, he wasn't.
There's no such thing as man of the year.
Yeah,
I hope Biden doesn't renegotiate the Iran nuclear deal, which is a disaster. We charge China hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes and tariffs, which saved our steel and it saved our auto industry.
I don't remember it that way.
Yeah.
Industries were incredibly upset about that.
Yeah, what I remember about the Iran deal was that he ended a deal that was bringing us closer to bringing Iran into the world community, and instead drove them to accelerate their nuclear program and go deeper into a vortex of religious extremism. That's the seed of disaster and terrorism that he planted with his presidency. And all this claim about NAFTA, his deal was a rewarmed NAFTA. I don't know why he was surprised he got through Congress, but that won't stop him from taking credit for it.
We'll take credit for anything.
Like being Man of the Year in Michigan.
Right. He tried to defund the Great Lakes Restoration Authority.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was only because all of our congressional delegation came together more than once.
There's a program nationally called the Great Lakes Restoration Act that pumps hundreds of millions of dollars into Michigan and other Great Lakes states every year, grows our economy, employs thousands of people, and it cleans up toxic sites that are left on the shores of our state. He threatened to kill it every year.
The largest tax increase in history that will export millions of jobs back to China and other foreign countries.
That's an effort to tax billionaires.
Exactly.
And the Republican Rick Scott plan, of course, instead would increase taxes for low-income workers.
This was the Rick Snyder plan. When I came to the legislature, the first thing that Republicans did when I first got to the legislature was they increased taxes on low-income people and seniors, and they lowered taxes on wealthy people.
And we can thank Citizens United for that. It's not that we didn't already have an issue with that, but Citizens United was sealed the deal. Now, it's all about how you win a campaign, and how you win a campaign oftentimes is when you have the best financing. Where do you get the best financing from? Billionaires.
Right here in Michigan, we see that every cycle with the DeVos family. A Republican candidate who wants to take public education dollars and funnel them into for-profit education companies, they can get a huge check from the DeVos family. I don't know a lot of people who can write a big check for state legislator offices. My friend's $100, that's a lot of money, right? But when you're a billionaire, you're making more money every year just off of interest than you could even spend. And that really pollutes our political process when those folks can just buy legislatures. And that's why we have the worst charter school regulations in the country. And you've got all sorts of corruption.
What's so interesting now, of course, is you have these traditional stalwart Republican supporters like the Chamber of Commerce, right? But you have Republicans that are in office that are actually hurting their interests. So whether it's this anti-immigration stance, which we know is bad for business, being anti-LGBTQ, which we know is bad for business, it doesn't help attract people to our state. We can't retain people in our state. Whether it has to do with what we talked about earlier with the Canadian truckers. Horrible for commerce, horrible for industry. I ask some of these business industries all the time, like, why do you continue to support Republicans when at this point they're not the party of business anymore? Because they're so extreme, they're actually hurting businesses in our state. It's bad for our state's reputation. People don't want to come here for business. People don't want to come here for vacation and for travel.
The Republicans who've controlled the state Senate since 1983 have presided over the crumbling of our roads, our bridges, our sewers, and we can put thousands of people to work in good paying jobs, rebuilding our infrastructure, building a platform for economic success. And the legislature just won't do that. They'll move money for corporate welfare very quickly, but when it comes to attending to the basic infrastructure that we all depend on, they fold their arms. It's almost like they run for office saying government won't work and doesn't work, and then when I get elected, I'm going to prove it.
But Americans will remember the Democrats.
Talking about COVID, this was the same president who, at the beginning of the COVID crisis, when it was mostly affecting blue states, because of course that's where a lot of the international commerce is, he said, oh, this is a blue state problem. Let them die. I'm not going to do anything about it.
And you'll remember that after we first opened up our auto manufacturing factory, we came to a Ford plant in Ypsilanti, and even though there had been a carefully negotiated agreement between UAW and the Big Three that involved mask wearing, he refused to wear a mask.
Republicans know that wearing a mask isn't fun, so let's argue against it. By politically positioning ourselves in a certain way, we can benefit from it. How do we keep people safe? How do we get ourselves back on track quicker? That should be the goal.
And that's what businesses want.
I think so.
Critical race theory in our schools, ban it in our military, and ban it in every part of our
Again, we're going to fact check this. Critical race theory is not taught in any of our K through 12 public schools in Michigan. And he's talking now, I believe, about the Don't Say Gay bill that we know there's a Michigan representative who has indicated that they're on the cusp of introducing such a bill here. Fortunately, it won't pass because of Governor Whitmer.
Biden's Department of Justice has also announced they will punish medical doctors who refuse to perform transgender procedures. I can't even believe
that's accurate. First of all, this is a real niche specialty, being able to perform gender reassignment surgery. I highly doubt that anyone is going to be punished for not performing a surgery that very few surgeons know how to do in the first place. To the contrast of that, though, they have said that they will punish doctors that perform abortions by sending them to jail or prison.
Protect women in sports and not allow men to enter into the women's game.
Just more of these sort of culture war elements to try to divide America.
And what's so very sad about it is when you talk about the suicide rate amongst trans children, transgender teenagers, and to vilify them the way that he has, we don't have a problem in women's sports, but we certainly do have a problem with suicides amongst the LGBTQ community, and especially children. And that's who he's targeting.
Then they come out, who do you vote for? Anybody that would rather not say that means they voted for Trump.
Well, think about that for a second. He's bragging about people being embarrassed to say that they voted for him.
They never had it. Was like 40-50% of the people said that.
Because they were so ashamed.
This was in the 16 election where we didn't do nearly as well as the 20, but these are minor details.
Minor details. These are votes. They're not minor details.
I was doing 5 and 6 major rallies a day for a week. Who the hell could do that?
Obama could absolutely do that and then not talk about it.
Call me crazy, but what I care about more than anything is not an individual's stamina to hold multiple rallies where they dispense falsehoods, but it's your actual policies when you're in office.
And then about 45 minutes later, I got a call from a real political expert. And he said, you know, you're doing great in Michigan.
But those of us who were in Michigan
North
and
Carolina,
watching elections for years knew it was over. We know that the votes always come in last in the more crowded places where they have more ballots to count. It's just common sense. And that's why before the election, Trump was telling people in Michigan, freeze it at 8 p.m. and let's just stop it there, because I know that I'll be winning at that point because they'll have counted all the Republican areas, but they won't have counted the Democratic
all
areas.
the absentee ballots. He wanted to stop the count because, of course, he'd be ahead before all of the absentee ballots were finally tabulated.
You know, for those of us who watch these things, it was kind of comical, the claims he was making.
Yeah, it wasn't comical at all when the call for stopping the count of the absentee ballots, large populated jurisdictions had a lot of absentee ballots to count and didn't have the resources or the machines to count them as quick as the press and the people wanted them to be tabulated.
And if this is one of the big issues that you've talked about in the legislature and that clerks have wanted for the longest time, just to have the same kind of procedures that you have in many Republican states, where you can actually start to count the votes ahead of time.
And it's actually more secure. You can tabulate and still not have a count, but it's more secure to get those ballots in the tabulator, in the bins, rather than keep them in the envelopes until polls open on election day.
You know, and in some states that have the same population, you had overnight results.
Republican clerks and Democratic clerks from all over the state were begging the legislature to do the right thing for months leading up to the election.
Yep.
They said, hey, if you don't give us this extra time, here's what's going to happen. It's going to take us a couple days and no one's going to like that. And then we saw exactly what the Republicans wanted, which was that gap between election day and the count being announced so that they could play this game of saying that the election was stolen.
I think that Trump's plan is actually working better than we thought, because I'm going to be termed out of office by the time he's done with this speech.
You ever see the bookies in Vegas? They're smart. Vegas bookies.
Okay, listen, polling serves many functions, but the actual voter turnout is what determines the winner and losers of an election. And he is intentionally missing that.
Let's not forget that the polling industry was a big assist to him in 2016. There were a lot of folks who just thought, oh, well, all the pollsters say that there's a very high likelihood that she's going to win, and people misunderstood a high confidence that she would win for a big margin. And therefore, a number of them didn't show up, and it just added up to, you know, an unexpected result.
And we need a landslide so big that the radical left cannot rig it or steal it.
Because we don't even have a left, much less a radical left in this country.
I'm for oil, I'm for God, I'm for guns.
You know, ideas
Oil,
that
God,
around the
and
world
guns
are considered moderate, like healthcare. Everyone gets healthcare. That's a pretty basic thing in most countries, and here it's somehow like some sort of radical left idea. It's not a reasonable way to think about the spectrum.
We actually, I believe, they substantially went over in some cases where they had more votes than they had voters.
That's not true. That's absolutely not true.
And the tell that shows he knows he was
All right.
lying is when he said, "I believe."
There you
Just
go.
do that little caveat in there.
That's the
'cause-
worst
red
flag you
flag.
can get. Ooh.
He clearly he's running for president, but yet he hasn't filed any paperwork. There's no question.
Yeah, he's definitely running for president. Thankfully, he would not file in my office. Federally, he would have to file some type of campaign finance, something or other. He's raising money. We saw in the very beginning his little donor tracker before he went up. So he's raising money right now. I would presume that's for his campaign. So he would have to be disclosing that information with a campaign filing at some point. But I don't know what the federal requirements actually would be for him.
Would anybody here like to see me run?
No, I would like to see him sail off into the sunset.
We will uphold the Judeo-Christian values and principles of our nation's founding.
Still have separation of church and state in this country. There's no requirement that you be one religion or another. And that is one of the things that I think so many people come here from around the world because they appreciate that.
Well, the effort to live up to our best ideals as Americans continues, and it continues in the face of people like Donald Trump who want to soil the Constitution rather than to actually lift up the greatest ideals, freedom for everybody, and giving everyone a voice in our nation through our democracy.
Seems like he's summing up. So before our viewers go to bed, please go to michigan.gov/vote and check your voter registration. Make sure you're registered to vote. Request an absentee ballot from your local clerk. Many of you will have a special election in May. We all have elections in August and November. And make sure you exercise your right to vote.
And like a muscle, right? Use it or lose it. And unfortunately, we are on the cusp of legitimately losing our democracy. And it's because we have people who have put not just party over country, but Trump over everything. Of all times for us to ensure that people are registered to vote, that people know how to vote, when to vote, where to vote, and that they actually do vote, it's this year. Because if we lose these important offices, like Secretary of State, like Attorney General, voting in 2024 could be something that we're really, really going to struggle with because we don't have people who are there to ensure that the will of the voters is ushered in. You know, as Attorney General, what I promise to the voters is if Donald Trump runs again in 2024 and if he legitimately wins, I will aggressively defend that election.
Because we took an oath of office and we respect that oath.
We respect that oath. We respect our responsibility to the voters. And that's why I want to encourage people to talk more about politics. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Talk about the quality of your schools. Talk about clean water and talk about our drinking water. Talk about our roads. Talk about our sewer systems. Talk about the systems that support a better world for us to live in and for our families to live in. Because I think that is the conversation and the connection we need to be having in our communities in order for folks to be engaged at the level where they can see the truth from the lies.
We will make America strong again.
And mostly,
We will make
he will be able to pardon himself and all his family members and his friends in the event that there are indictments issued by the Department of Justice.
Thank you, Michigan. God bless.
Oh my God, thank God it's over. Barb, Jeff, I love you guys. You are amazing, and thank you for doing this with me. But this has been the hardest
Exhausting.
and most exhausting
Yeah.
evening I could say, in God knows how long. But I think that it should make us more committed than ever to ensuring that we are doing all of our jobs. And so I appreciate both of you guys. Thank you, tech people behind the scene. And thanks for everybody who helped to fact check this event. Oh my God, it's late. Let's all go home.
Yes, it is time. Thank you. Good job.